Welcome back, nerds. If you're new to this channel, then my name is Todd Gamble, and I'm a certified apprentice level beekeeper in the Texas Master Beekeepers program. My wife would probably tell you that I'm certifiably crazy, but that's a whole nother story. Anyway, today it is 21 degrees here in Longview, Texas. This is the third week of January, and I'm going to be talking about getting your apiary ready for spring. I think this is really important. I thought about doing a winter insulation video, but at this point, we're already into winter, and if your hives aren't insulated and ready for winter, they're not going to be. So let's talk about getting ready for the spring and what we need to do that. So three of the topics we're going to talk about is one, replenishing your stock. And that's going to include if you need to buy new stock, what are we going to do for that? We want to talk about wintering, the indoor winter hive maintenance part of what we need to do in the wintertime in the shop to get ready for the spring. We're also going to talk about outdoor hive maintenance, some of the things we want to do during the wintertime outside with our hives. And then finally, I want to talk about winter feeding for your bees to help get them through the last part of winter, early part of spring, when the brood is going to start to develop quickly. So let's talk about first replenishing your stock. Now, if you did not catch any swarms or make any splits during swarm season, the early part of spring, or you had a few die-offs or absconds during the year, January is the time of year to start looking at purchasing replacement queens, nukes, or complete brood box hives. You can buy an 8 or 10 frame replacement as opposed to a nuke. And I did say livestock because in the state of Texas, bees, honeybees specifically, are considered livestock. Now, I'm not sure about your state, so you may have different classifications for honeybees in your state. In Texas, they are livestock, and if you have bees, you can actually are available to get a agricultural tax exemption for keeping bees. But anyway, let's talk about livestock replacement. So it's a good practice to order any queens, nukes, or complete hives from locally sourced apiaries. And the reason I say that is because most of your larger apiaries will sell replacement stock are located in California, here in Texas, Florida, or many of the other southern states. Not as many apiaries sell replacement bees in the northern part of the country, but there are some that do that. Local bees are acclimated to your region, and so they generally perform better in your area than bringing in stock from somewhere outside of your area and putting them into a climate which they are not used to. So local bees local bees generally do better in their own environment. They're accustomed to that. Purchasing local bees from an apiary in your area also benefits that business. And I'm a big fan of purchasing locally whenever possible. Will it cost you a little bit more? Probably. Not always, but the advantage to supporting local-based apiaries is it keeps them in business, and that's good for you, and it's good for everybody else in beekeeping. So when we're purchasing livestock replacement, we're going to look at three things. One, replacing queens. Two, purchasing nukes. And like I said, three, purchasing a complete, what we call a brood box. Some apiaries will sell you the kit, which includes the brood, the bottom, and the top cover. But in my instance here, I'm going to be talking about just a brood box of bees, which is usually an 8 to 10 frame box. So mated queens. Mated queens are going to cost you anywhere from $35 to $50 at the time of this recording. Most commercial operations replace their queens every 1 year. Some will go 2 years because this is when they are most productive. After about that third winter, your queen may or may not, depending on her genetics, start to produce less brood, lay more eggs. In that case, you're going to see a drop off in your bees. Drop off in your bees means you have less honey production if that's what you're after. Now, as a backyard beekeeper, I try to keep my queens for 3 winters and then replace her with a new queen if the bees don't do it themselves through supersedure or if a swarm gets away from me and I don't notice that, because when a hive swarms, the old queen leaves and the new queen generally is the one that stays behind, so you have a fresh queen. I like to take my old queen, take her and put her in a 5-frame newt box, give her a couple frames of brood and a couple frames of resources. This allows me to have a backup in case my new queen comes and she's damaged in the heat, she arrives dead. If I put her in the hive and I roll her and I kill her, or maybe the bees don't like her, I don't know. It's always good to have that backup so that if the new queen fails, you can pull that old queen right out of the newt box, stick her back into your brood box, and you're good to go. Now, you still have a 3-year-old queen in there, but it's better to be queen right than to have a laying worker. So, newt boxes or brood box purchases. This is generally a matter of personal preference. So your nucleus box, called nukes, some people call them nooks. I don't know. To me, it looks like nuke because it's nucleus, but hey, I'm in East Texas, so I speak like a redneck. Anyway, so most nukes in my local area run about $210 to $250. Now the price is going to change whether you ask for a mated queen as opposed to a non-mated queen. And I'm going to be honest, if you're new in beekeeping, even if you've been doing it for a long time and your eyes get old like mine, it is far easier to spot a marked queen than it is to be an unmarked queen. But the more experience you get, you do get better at spotting queens. Personally, I pay a little extra and get a marked queen. It's just easier for me, and usually it's about another $20 to $25. So a 5-frame nuke generally is going to come with 5 frames, as it specifies. Basically, they generally have 3 frames of brood, 2 frames of resources, and your resources are going to be bee bread and honey. This is designed just to get them home. You bring the nuke box home. Generally, I set it in the spot where I want it to go overnight. Let it sit overnight because they're a little aggravated after you move them. Take them out of the bag, let them sit there, get the orientation flights, let them stay for a day or two, and then I'm going to take that nuke, which is sitting in front of the hive where I want that hive to go, and I'm simply going to take the frames and put them into my existing hive. It's pretty easy peasy. That's the way I do it. Now, keep in mind that if you're going to buy Varroa sensitive hygienic genes or queens, VHS queens, it's going to cost you more, and it may cost you an extra $20. These queens, in theory, have the gene where if mites are under the capped brood, the worker bees will pull the cap off, pull out the brood and the mites, and drop them outside of your colony. A complete 10-frame brood box in my local area is about $230 to $275. Again, if you get a marked queen, it's going to cost you more money. Normally, a 10-frame box has 8 frames of, usually has 8 frames in it because there's a 2-frame feeder that they generally give with you. So you're talking about 5 frames of brood and then 3 frames of honey and bee bread. Again, if you buy the Varroa sensitive hygienic queens, it's going to cost you more money. Again, I prefer to have a marked queen. It's all a matter of personal preference. If you want to save a few dollars, you can not do that, but it sure makes it easier when you're looking at frames if you have one. So that's pretty much it when it comes to buying replacement stock for the spring. And I don't do it often because usually I can rely on walkaway splits or swarms, but it's good occasionally to bring some new genetics into your hive just to keep something a little different. So now I want to talk about outdoor winter hive maintenance. So winter is the time when we really want to get out there, look at our equipment, and decide what needs to be repaired, what we can repair, and what we need to replace. So like I said, this is the best time to repair, repaint all of our used equipment. So we want to inspect our hive and nuke boxes for warping, cracks at the seams. We want to repair these as necessary. Paint or treat any new or repaired nuke or hive boxes. We want to inspect the bottom boards of the hive, especially if you have plywood laminated bottom boards, they tend to get wet and can separate during the spring and summer months. Replace these as necessary. I would replace them with solid wood. It is more expensive generally, although the cost of plywood is quite a bit more. You want to build any new hive boxes that you think necessary to replace aging equipment and to have a couple extras on hand. Believe it or not, if your bees, they build up really quick in the spring, you may find yourself in a situation where you need to do a split and you may need an extra box. So you always want to have some extra hive boxes and some extra nucleus boxes on hand. Check for sales in your area. And even on the internet, you can find some Black Friday sales, but that's generally in the fall. And you can find equipment new, cheaper sometimes than you can build it, because dimensional lumber has really increased in price. And by the time you look at your time and the cost of the equipment, sometimes it's definitely cheaper to purchase unassembled boxes or even assembled boxes if you get them on sale. I do both. I do make my own equipment, a lot of it, especially horizontal hives, and those are a lot harder to outsource, and it's a lot easier to make. But swarm traps, you want to get your swarm traps ready for the spring, especially if you're looking to capture any swarms or wild colonies. If you don't have any, I highly suggest you build some. They're really simple. A hive trap is essentially a brood box, about that size, a box that can hold frames. This is something that is really good to use old, aging, cracked hive boxes for. You can just, since you're using it as a trap and it already has a good bee smell in there, if it has a little bit of a gap in it, it's going to be okay, because guess what? This is a temporary home. So you can use those old brood boxes for swarm traps. They make great swarm traps, and it saves you a lot of money. You can also take those old brood boxes, cut them in half, and make a feeder shim out of them. It's a good use for an old box, especially if you have an area where it's just separating at the top, or it's got a bad crack, or bees have chewed through part of the wood, because they'll chew through it. Even if you lose half of a full-size brood box, it makes a great feeder shim. You want to build any nuke boxes if you're going to do splits in the spring. I cannot tell you how important it is to have some nucleus boxes around. You can make a walkaway split, put those bees into a nuke box. They will build out comb. They are resource making machines for you. You can just pull from them as you need them and stick them in one of your big hives, drop a new frame in, and then produce more wax. I'm not sure why they build up foundation faster than anything else. Maybe it's because of smaller space, but your nuke boxes are going to be gold for you as a backyard beekeeper. And that's really pretty much all you need to do for your indoor winter maintenance, because this is a time when we work in the shop. We are not outside tending our bees. We have put them away for the winter time, and we're not going to mess with them to the spring. I highly advise you not to open that hive box because you think the bees may be dead, because they're probably just in a state of torpor. And you don't want to open that box and expose them to cold air, because then you've killed your bees. And guess what? If the bees are already dead, what are you going to do? You're not going to bring in a new swarm, and you're not going to order new bees to replace them in the wintertime, and you're not going to split a healthy colony into two weaker colonies. So please do not open your hives in the wintertime and kill your bees. If they're dead, we'll just close up the entrance if you think they are, but don't do that, because sometimes they're just in a state of torpor. But as the spring comes along, and if you have a dead out, close that off, empty out, clean the hive, and roll on. But you need to ignore that urge to open your hives in the wintertime. Outdoor winter hive maintenance is different here in Texas than it is in a lot of the northern states. I guess pretty much in the southern states, it's about the same. It just depends on your actual climate. So what we want to do for outdoor winter hive maintenance is you want to tip your hive a little bit forward, just to allow any excess condensation that it's not used by the bees to drain towards the front of the hive. If you have an open entrance at the bottom, then this spare or excess moisture will drip onto the floor. I put a small 1/8 to 1/4 inch shim under the back of the bottom board. I like to do this as opposed to putting to raising the hive stand, because I may not remember the hive stand is pushed forward. Will it hurt? No, but at least if I put the shim underneath the bottom board, I visibly see that shim in the springtime. If you use disc style entrances, like I have on some of mine, or your entrance is 1 or 2 inches off the bottom board like I do with mine, then tipping the hive forward may not benefit the hive as far as allowing that excess moisture to run out the front, but it really can't hurt either. You want to clear all your landing boards of snow and ice buildup as necessary. Generally, that's not a problem for us in Texas, but this last week we have had 3 days of snow and sleet, so it is built up some on the landing board. If you have a landing board, not all of our hives have landing boards, but most of them do. Obviously, the more snow you get in your region, the more often this needs to be done. At a minimum, I would do this once a week. Yes, I get it. Your bees are probably not going to fly out every week, but if you do this, then you don't have to worry about it warming up enough from the heat of the hive and becoming a big ice block in front of your entrance, which is a pain in the backside to have to remove. You also want to make sure that your entrance is clear of dead bees so that the bees, when it's warm enough, generally about 50 degrees or warmer, can make their necessary elimination flights on those warm days. Because during the winter, bees will die off from a variety of reasons, and if you have extremely cold temperatures and the hive is drafty, your bees can die off at an alarmingly higher rate. And what happens is these bees, they die and then they all fall down to the bottom, and they can block the entrance to your hive. And if the entrance is blocked, then on those warm days, your bees cannot get outside to eliminate from all the resources they have consumed during the year or during that time since it warmed up last. And bees don't like to eliminate in the hive. They really want to go outside and eliminate. And so you want to take a tool. So when you clean off that snow, if you live up somewhere north, take your coat hanger or a tool, whatever you can get in there, to get in there and scrape those bees forward out onto the landing board and onto the ground. In the warmer time, the undertaker bees in the hive will remove this debris and those dead bees, but when it's cold and they're in a state of torpor, they don't move a whole lot. So you have to help them. For me, my entrances are a little higher up, so I just take a small dowel, 3/8 inch. I kind of push it in there, just make sure that if there are dead bees on the bottom board, they're pushed out of the way so that the bees in the hive that are alive can get out and make their elimination flights. And then in the spring, they will remove all the dead bees and toss them out themselves. Just keep in mind that when it's colder, so if you live in a colder area, your bees have to produce more heat to warm the brood, and they're going to use more resources, and more of them are probably going to burn themselves out and die. Bees can really live in super, super cold temperatures, but what they cannot do is they cannot live if they do not have food. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Okay, so of all the topics I'm going to talk about, this one tends to be the most controversial for some beekeepers. I'm not sure why, but it is. And we're going to talk about the topic of winter feeding. Now, colonies that die off due to starvation typically die off in the later winter months or the early spring months. And that's when the brood starts to build up to get ready for the spring nectar and honey flow. At this time, there is a surge in brood production. It gets higher and higher as your resources get smaller and smaller, especially if the colony consumed a large part of its resources during the winter to try to keep the brood warm. So you have a really cold winter, they're going to burn up more resources, and they may not be able to sustain this spring buildup. Then they begin to die because there's no forage available. So keep in mind that your winter feeding is an emergency style feeding. It is not you're not making feed to feed them all year. You should have left them enough resources to get through the winter, but sometimes we get it wrong. Sometimes the bees get it wrong. So it's important, in my opinion, that you have some kind of a winter bee food resource. Now, backup resources are used primarily in the late winter and early spring. When the temperature is below 32 degrees, use solid feeding. Place granulated sugars in rapid rounds, or you can do the mountain camp method, and that's where you spread newspaper over the frames of your hive. You pour granulated sugar on top, close up the hive. I don't like this technique because you don't want to open the hive back up if you have to refeed. I prefer to have a feeder shim, use a rapid round if I'm going to use granulated sugar, and I can refill that granulated sugar without having to expose the cluster to the outside temperature. You can also make sugar bricks, which can be stored in the freezer until you need them. Sugar bricks, again, some people place them directly on top of the hive frames. I do not like to do this. I like to place them on top of my feeder shim. You can make fondant, or you can buy fondant. Fondant making is it's definitely an art form, and you can ruin a pot or two, or spend several hours trying to get hard candy hard sugar off the bottom of your pots and pans. Ask me how I know, because this guy's done it. Although I've also made fondant very successfully. Part of having 3 culinary degrees means I've made a lot of fondant, but I've also crapped up a lot of batches. So having said that, you can make fondant. It is made by heating up sugar and water to the soft ball stage, cook it for a while, pour it in some pans. It's more pliable. Some people say it's easier for the bees to consume and eat. It does change the sugar ratio, so that is a fact. Whether it's better than granulated sugar, that's a matter of discussion. But you can also place these in bags and put them in the freezer, pull them out as you need them, or you could do something like buy Hive Alive fondant. And I think there are several other fondant manufacturers out there, but again, granulated sugar, sugar brick, fondant, either one of them is a matter of personal choice. Have some available just in case you need it. So when the temperature starts to get above 32 degrees at nighttime, that's when it's time to switch to a liquid form of sugar feeding if necessary. A 2-to-1 sugar syrup, which is 2 pounds of sugar for every pound of water, gives the bees more access to the needed carbohydrates. However, a good 1-to-1, which is 1 pound of sugar to 1 pound of water, will also keep your bees from starving. Probably a 1/2-to-1 would do that, but sugar's cheap and buying bees is not. So I would give them, in the late spring, if it's warm enough, I give them a 2-to-1. If you want to go 1-to-1, you can. I know some beekeepers say that a 1-to-1 helps them produce more wax and build out more frames faster, but I'm not really sure about that. Protein patties, don't use them. I'm thinking about using them in the fall. I got a good tip from Rusty, who's the president of the Longview Beekeepers Association. He says he buys the longer patty. He cuts them up in like 1 by 3 inch strips, puts them in the hive, and when the bees have eaten that whole small piece of protein patty, he adds another one, keeps them in his freezer in a Ziploc bag. So doing it this way keeps the small hive beetle population down, because he says those small hive beetles really like protein patties. Again, I don't have any experience with protein patties, so this is going to be talk to someone in your bee club or your mentor and kind of get an idea of what they do in your area. Protein is important for brood production, but here I'm talking about a food source to keep your bees alive. And is it necessary? No, but it could help them, and it sure won't hurt them. Now, when it comes to feeding, I realize that there are going to be some beekeepers that tell you that the bees do not need to be fed. If they have good genetics, they'll survive the wintertime and your apiary will be stronger, and they suggest that only allowing the strongest colonies to survive. This is a good idea in theory. However, you need to keep in mind that the weather is unpredictable, and bees do not always starve because they are poor foragers or they have poor genetics. Many times It's the beekeeper who causes the starvation. We pull too much honey in the summer and fall, and the bees simply do not have enough time to replenish their stores and get ready for overwintering. Now, commercial beekeepers, those guys pull all their honey and then they sugar feed, or they move their bees to warmer parts of the country and where there's forage available. They do this because honey sells for about 3 times what a sugar syrup is. So it makes economic sense for them to do this. But as a backyard beekeeper, if you're wanting to collect honey just to give away to your friends or sell at your local farmer's market, save your bees by allowing them to have a little bit of additional honey in their hives. However, if you want to pull all the honey you can, it is far cheaper to have a backup sugar solution, sugar brick, or fondant than it is to replace your bees in the spring due to starvation. And that's pretty much it, nerds, of how I manage the apiary through the first 3 winter months of the year. It's all about maintenance and having your emergency food ready. The bees will do everything on their own. You've got them buttoned up for the winter. If you've done your job, you've insulated the top of your hives, you put your insulated inner and outer covers on, you're not opening up the hive so that you're breaking that propolis seal around the boxes, your bees will cluster together and they will do what they need to do. Your only job is to make sure you have them ready for winter, do your maintenance. Don't be cracking open that hive to look to see if they're alive, because if they were and they were just weak, you may have just killed them. And then wait for the spring to come. And that's it. It's easy peasy. Let's face it, you are going to kill some bees. Some of your bees are going to die. That's just a matter of beekeeping. But you want to do everything you can to ensure the success. So don't be that guy that's out there, I got to crack my hive, I got to look, I haven't seen bees flying, it's been, 3 weeks, it's been a month. Leave them alone. Let them do their thing. All right, guys. Until next time, Todd Gamble, apprentice level certified master beekeeper with the Texas Master Beekeepers Program. Y'all be safe, and we'll see you then. Bye.